Welcome to Copilot Podcasts. There is a small robot sitting on a desk somewhere right now, and a college student is writing in a journal about how it made them feel less alone. Not a phone, not a friend, a robot. And the weird part, the research says it actually worked. Today, we're getting into robots as companions, specifically what science says about whether these things genuinely help people, who benefits the most, and where the whole idea starts to get ethically complicated. By the end of this episode, you'll have a real handle on what companion robots actually are, what the data shows about their impact, and why some researchers think we need to completely rethink how we categorize them. And to dig into all of that, I've got someone who has been deep in this material.
So let's start with something that I think gets lost immediately when people hear robot companion. They picture either C-3PO or some creepy humanoid, and neither of those is really what we're talking about.
Right, because pop culture has been setting up these expectations for decades.
Exactly. And the University of Florida researchers actually called this out directly. They noted that for decades, robotic companions have been a staple of pop culture, with movies and shows like Star Wars, Futurama, The Iron Giant, and Her depicting a future where humans and robots coexist, form bonds, and even strike up romantic relationships. So we come into this conversation with a lot of baggage.
And now the science is actually catching up to what those stories imagined, which is kind of wild.
It is. So let's ground this. A companion robot, as the research defines it, is distinct from an assistant robot. According to a review published in the International Journal of Ethics and Systems, companion robots focus on building relationships with owners and facilitating sustained social interaction, while also providing domestic assistance. The key word there is relationship. It's not just about completing tasks.
So it's less, hey, set a timer, and more something that actually hangs out with you.
That's a pretty good way to put it. And there's a study from the University of Florida that really illustrates what that looks like in practice. Researchers had 20 university students, all between 18 and 25, spend a week with an AI robot called Eilic. They kept online journals about their interactions and then were interviewed at the end.
And what did they find?
So the journals revealed 4 things that participants valued most in human companionship: shared experience, emotional and tangible support, reciprocal relational investment, and unpredictability. And then they measured Eilic against those 4 things.
Okay, I have to push back here a little. Reciprocal investment and unpredictability? Those feel like the 2 things a robot fundamentally cannot do.
That's the honest tension in the data. Participants generally agreed that their interactions with Eilic lacked the depth of human interactions. So you're not wrong, but here's what's interesting. Most still enjoyed its company. One participant said Eilic's lifelike and expressive manners were comforting during episodes of loneliness.
Okay, that's actually kind of moving.
And there's another finding that I think is genuinely underappreciated. Other participants noted that being around Eilic was less stressful than being around other humans, because they could avoid social norms and just be themselves. One participant wrote that it felt nice to have a friend they didn't need to be presentable around.
Wait, less stressful than being around other humans? That says something pretty uncomfortable about how exhausting social norms actually are.
It really does. And I think that's one of the more quietly radical findings in this whole space. We talk about loneliness as this absence of connection, but sometimes the barrier to connection is the performance that human relationships require. A robot removes that barrier entirely.
So it's not just filling a void, it's filling a void in a way that's actually lower friction.
Exactly. And that framing becomes really important when you look at the more rigorous clinical research. There's a study published in the ACM SIGCHI proceedings with researchers from MIT among the authors that ran an 8-week deployment study with 70 participants.
8 weeks is a real commitment. What were they testing?
They compared 3 conditions. One group had a robot with only assistant-like skills, basically a smart helper. A second group had a coach-like robot that delivered positive psychology interventions in an instructive way, and a third group had a companion-like robot that delivered the same interventions but in a peer-like, supportive manner.
So the content was the same, but the relationship style was different.
Exactly. And the companion-like robot won. It was the most effective at building a positive therapeutic alliance with people, enhancing participants' well-being and readiness for change. The researchers concluded that companion AI agents could further enhance the efficacy of mental health interventions by strengthening their therapeutic alliance with people for long-term support.
So the how it talks to you matters as much as what it says.
More than that, the research specifically points out that most existing interactive agents for mental health present themselves as expert coaches that teach or guide people. But that top-down dynamic is actually less effective than a robot that acts like a peer sharing the journey alongside you.
That's a really interesting design insight. It's not about the robot being smarter or more capable. It's about the robot being more alongside you.
Right. And that peer-like framing is what actually builds what the researchers call a therapeutic alliance, which is this established concept from human therapy about the quality of the relationship between a client and their support system.
So they're borrowing a framework from human psychology and applying it to human-robot interaction.
Which is itself a sign of how seriously this field is being taken. Now, let's zoom out to the population where this arguably matters most, older adults.
Yeah, because loneliness in older adults is a massive public health issue.
Massive. A meta-analysis published in The Gerontologist, that's an Oxford academic journal, synthesized data from 19 studies involving over 1,000 participants. And the headline finding is that social robots significantly reduced loneliness among older adults. The researchers also noted that loneliness, which they called the geriatric giant, affects over a quarter of older adults worldwide.
A quarter of older adults worldwide. That's an enormous number of people.
And the meta-analysis found that the effects were strongest in institutional settings, so care homes, assisted living facilities, compared to people living independently. Which makes sense when you think about it. If you're in a care facility, your access to spontaneous social interaction is much more limited.
And there was something interesting about where in the world these effects were strongest, right?
Yeah, this is one of those findings that makes you stop and think. The meta-analysis found stronger intervention effects in Japan and Turkey than in the United States. And the researchers flagged that cultural context matters. They recommended culturally sensitive and inclusive implementation strategies. So a robot companion isn't a one-size-fits-all solution.
That's a really important caveat. The same robot might land completely differently depending on where you are and what your cultural relationship to technology and caregiving looks like.
Exactly. And that brings us to the part of this conversation that I think is the most unresolved, the ethical dimension.
Because it's not all upside, right? There are real concerns here.
Real concerns. And they come from multiple directions. Let's start with what philosopher Paul Healy, writing in the AI and Society journal published by Springer, calls the dummy human problem.
The dummy human problem. Okay, what is that?
Healy argues that social robots are, in his words, little more than sophisticated toys with the potential to deceive their users about the prospects for genuine partnership and bonding. So the concern is that people form what feels like a real bond, but the robot can't actually reciprocate in any meaningful sense. It's a one-sided relationship dressed up to look mutual.
That's a pretty sharp critique, and it connects to something I've been thinking about. If the robot is designed to seem like it cares, but it doesn't actually care, is that deception?
That's exactly the question the ethics literature is wrestling with. A review published in the International Journal of Ethics and Systems identified 3 prominent controversies in social robotics ethics: deception, dehumanization, and violence. And deception is front and center, because companion robots are specifically designed to trigger social and emotional responses in humans.
And there's also the more practical concern. FIU Business did research on seniors and robot companions and found that US seniors had real concerns about digital dependency, costs, and data security.
Right, and those aren't abstract worries. If an older adult becomes reliant on a robot companion and then can't afford to maintain it, or the company shuts down, or their data gets compromised, those are concrete harms. The technology creates new vulnerabilities even as it addresses real needs.
So it's not just, is the robot good or bad? It's about who has access, who bears the risk, and who's designing these things with what values in mind.
Exactly. And MIT Media Lab researchers have been working on exactly this. Their work on ethics, equity, and justice in human-robot interaction argues that as social robots rapidly become mainstream technologies, it's critical to consider their societal and ethical impacts, including their ability to perpetuate or mitigate social inequities around race, class, gender, and disability.
So the design of these robots isn't neutral. The choices baked into them reflect values, and those values can either include people or exclude them.
And there's a broader philosophical point here that I find really compelling. Healy's paper in AI and Society concludes that social robots can't truly qualify as what he calls THOUs, genuine human partners. But it also argues that it's wrong to dismiss them as mere machines, slaves, or pets. None of those categories fit.
So there's something genuinely new. We don't have the right word for what they are yet.
That's the honest answer. Researchers Damiano and Dumuchel, cited in Healy's paper, suggest that social robots constitute new types of artificial companions which we can find companionable in different ways. Not the same as human companionship, not fake companionship, something else.
Companionable in different ways. I actually like that framing. It takes the pressure off the robot to be a human replacement and lets it be what it actually is.
And that framing also has practical implications for how we design and deploy these systems. If we stop trying to make robots pass as human companions and instead lean into what they uniquely offer, availability, patience, no social judgment, we might get better outcomes.
Which loops back to that finding from the Florida study. The students who found ILIC less stressful than human interaction weren't being fooled into thinking it was human. They knew exactly what it was. And that was kind of the point.
Right. The value wasn't in the illusion, it was in the actual interaction on its own terms.
Okay, so let me ask you the harder version of the question. Given everything, the benefits for mental health, the loneliness data, the ethical concerns, the dummy human problem, where does this actually land for you?
I think the honest answer is that the evidence is genuinely promising, but the ethical infrastructure hasn't caught up. The ACM-SIGCHI study shows real therapeutic benefit. The gerontologist meta-analysis shows real reduction in loneliness, but the concerns about deception, dependency, and inequitable access are also real. We're at a moment where the technology is ahead of our frameworks for thinking about it.
And the Frontiers paper you mentioned earlier makes a similar point, that we need to understand AI and robots on their own terms, not just through human-centered analogies.
Exactly. We keep trying to evaluate robot companions by asking, are they as good as human companions? And that's probably the wrong question. The better question is, what can they uniquely offer, and how do we make sure those benefits are distributed fairly and designed ethically?
That reframe is really useful. It's not a competition with human connection, it's a different kind of thing entirely.
And the research on the peer-like framing from the MIT-linked study really supports that. The companion robot didn't win because it was pretending to be human. It won because it was designed to walk alongside people rather than lecture them. That's a design philosophy, not a deception.
So when you step back from all of this, the studies, the ethics debates, the pop culture backdrop, here's what I think this really comes down to.
Go ahead.
Robots as companions are neither the sci-fi dream nor a hollow gimmick. The data from the gerontologist meta-analysis, 19 studies, over 1,000 participants, shows they genuinely reduce loneliness. The ACM-SIGCHI research shows that when designed as peers rather than coaches, they build real therapeutic alliances. And the Florida study shows that even young tech-savvy people find something valuable in them that isn't about being fooled.
And at the same time, the concerns from FIU's research on seniors, dependency, cost, data security, and the philosophical challenge Healy raises about the dummy human problem are not things we can just wave away. They're real design and policy challenges that need real answers.
So the actionable takeaway isn't robots are the future of friendship or robots are fake and dangerous. It's more nuanced than that. It's the category of companion robot is genuinely new, the benefits are real under the right conditions, and the ethical design choices made right now will determine whether those benefits reach the people who need them most.
And the cultural context piece from the meta-analysis is worth sitting with too. The fact that effects were stronger in Japan and Turkey than in the US suggests that how a society thinks about caregiving, technology, and connection shapes whether these tools actually work. This isn't just a tech problem, it's a cultural and policy problem.
Which means the conversation can't just happen in robotics labs. It has to happen in policy rooms, in care facilities, in communities.
Exactly. And the MIT Media Lab framework for equity and justice in human-robot interaction is pointing in that direction, asking who benefits, who bears the risk, and who gets left out. Those are the right questions to be asking right now, while the technology is still being shaped.
Here's what I keep coming back to. We started this episode with a college student writing in a journal about a robot making them feel less alone. And the research says that experience was real, not because the robot was human, not because it was pretending to be, but because it was present, consistent, and non-judgmental in a way that actually mattered to that person.
And that's not nothing. In a world where over a quarter of older adults are lonely, where mental health resources are stretched thin, where people are exhausted by the performance of human social interaction, a companion that meets you where you are, without judgment, without expectation, is genuinely valuable, even if we don't have the perfect word for what it is yet.
Companionable in different ways.
Companionable in different ways.
that small robot on someone's desk right now, the one we opened with, it might not be a friend in the way we've always defined the word, but maybe that's exactly the point. Maybe the definition needs to expand.
Thanks for being here for this one, and thanks to everyone listening to Copilot Podcasts. If this episode made you think differently about what connection actually means, that's the whole idea.